Russia face any consequences if Vladimir Putin does not agree to stop the war after your meeting on Friday?
Yes, they will. Yeah.
What will the consequences
there will be
be? Sanctions, tariffs?
There will be, I don't have to say, there will be very severe consequences.
President saying very severe consequences as they try to push for peace through strength as he prepares to bring Vladimir Putin to the table on Friday in Alaska. The goal, the ultimate goal, is to end the war in Ukraine. European leaders saying that security guarantees for Ukraine need to be front and center. Ukrainian President Zelensky will not be part of the first round talks.
Putin is bluffing. He is trying to put pressure before the meeting in Alaska along all part of the Ukrainian front. Russia is trying to show that it can occupy all of Ukraine.
Joining me now, Brett Velicovich, a former U.S. Army intelligence and special operations soldier, drone expert, and Fox News contributor. Brett, great to have you with us today. Obviously, the stakes on Friday are enormous, and it sounds from what President Trump said earlier today that he will know in a couple of minutes of meeting Putin whether or not he is open to a genuine ceasefire. And that seems to be the goal for this Friday part of opening these negotiations. What are your thoughts as you look at this right now?
Well, you're exactly right. I think that this is a test for President Trump to look Putin in the eye and to determine whether or not he needs to tighten the screws. And it's clear that the president has had enough of the bloodshed and the diplomatic stalemate that currently exists with these negotiations. The war needs to end. Right now, the president is the only one who seems to be able to bring peace and fix this. We simply just can't walk away from this conflict and turn a blind eye to innocent people dying. That's not who we are as Americans. We're good people. And my thoughts are President Trump is the only one who can fix this. And once again, he's driving this forward as the global peacemaker that the American people have asked him to be. Europe's leaders aren't going to fix it. NATO won't fix it. Only he can. And everyone wants a quick end to this war, but it's so much more complicated than most people understand. He has to move the needle slowly, step by step. But one thing that's clear that I've seen from his recent public statements is that Putin has shown his true face to him over these last few months. He's been given a lot of chances for peace. I think the president's finally realizing what myself and others have been saying for a while, that his words can't be trusted. And he's going to say whatever he can to try and play us for his own personal crusade. And I believe this upcoming meeting is a calculated test on behalf of the president to determine where Putin's head is after all these recent threats of sanctions, threats of economic retribution of Putin's closest allies like India, and to look him in the eye and understand whether or not, again, to tighten the screws and force a deal.
Yeah, President Trump has put sanctions on India for buying oil from Russia and has suggested that he might do the same thing with China. So that's a big issue that would really cut into Russia's only economic business, which is selling oil around the side of these sanctions. Let's put up this map, which shows Russia's idea of the territory that they think should be what they call New Russia, and that's the red part. The gray part that you see on the right-hand side is the part that they have largely occupied during this war. Is there any question that Putin wants to destroy, essentially, Ukraine? He wants a new government, a new regime, no military allowed in the country of Ukraine, and no option of entering NATO, right? Let's put these, what each side wants up on the screen and ask Brett to answer that.
Yeah, that's exactly what he wants. He wants to take land. He has his own personal crusade. And, Putin probably doesn't need to actually win out of these negotiations. Trump needs to find a way to give him that impression. He needs to feel like this was all worth it. And for him, that means taking land. But I'm just saddened, frankly, by the lack of progress between the two countries and the lives lost. The world is looking to Russia to come to an agreement for peace, but yet they continue to commit war crimes in broad daylight. Putin will verbally commit to stopping attacks on civilians and then 24 hours later attack civilian infrastructure. And that's the biggest problem. They are clearly targeting civilians. It's a concerted effort by senior levels of the Kremlin to strike innocent civilians, and that's not acting within the laws of international warfare. That's called terrorism. And I want to say something that should really upset Americans. It should upset the world. When Russia invaded 3 years ago, they stole thousands of innocent Ukrainian children, Martha. They brought them back across the border into Russia. These children had families. Many were killed during the fighting, some displaced. In many cases, the Russians stole their identity, re-registered them under different names, gave them Russian passports to make it difficult for them to get back home. And you have Ukrainian mothers right now literally finding their children listed on Russian online websites being sold and offered up to the highest bidder. There are catalogs of these children being offered up. That's child trafficking. And any deal that the president makes, any deal that's made, it's got to include returning these children home to their families, because enough is enough. And I do think in the end, look, Zelensky's not saying it publicly, but he probably will end up losing land. And that's just the reality of it all.
I'm glad you brought up these children, an estimated 20,000 of them. As you say, a lot of the parents were killed or displaced. The families have been separated, and now they're essentially being brainwashed in Russia to become young Russian, children, former Ukrainian children of the future of Russia. It's a very dark story. Brett Velicovich, thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.